What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Java Talks. I'm your host, RJ Jovangula. And, tonight I've been going through this weird rabbit hole of Joe Rogan. And if you know me, you know I love Joe Rogan. He's one of my inspirations. He's one of the reasons I started this podcast in the beginning, almost over a year ago now. And I started looking at something that's been coming up recently because of the Women's World Cup and something that's been popping up on my timeline quite a bit. And it's this idea of diversity over merit. And, you know, I think that a lot of the times we kind of go into this weird, crazy hole where we argue whether we should include in people, whether we should be allowing these people of different backgrounds, of these different ethnical backgrounds, of these different genders, of these different orientations, whatever it might be, if we whether we should be allowing these people in and whether we should be looking at merit or whether we should just be looking at people. And the other day I kind of had this weird conversation with someone that I know where I was talking about female comedians, and I was talking about how I wanted to watch a female comedian who was actually funny and not just because she was a female. And that got taken so poorly. And when I look back at that statement, right, to me there was nothing wrong with it. To me, it was a matter of looking at someone and thinking, okay, are they funny or are they not? But now the way I phrased it came off was, are they female and can a female be funny? And that wasn't what I intended. I think we're in this weird social norm nowadays where we can't even think about whether someone's funny or not because there's so many other factors that go into it. We can't see if someone's talented or not because now we have to look at, are they a female or are they male? Are they someone from the LGBTQ plus community? Are they black? Are they white? Are they brown? Or are they Asian? So there's so many other factors that go into it where you can't even make simple statements like I did where, I don't even care if it's a female or a male, but I want to see someone who's funny. And now it's this matter of, who are we going to champion, right? Are we going to let people become successful because of what their gender or what their race or what their political ideologies are? Or are we going to make them famous? Or are we going to make them well known because of the talent that they have? And I had a hot take about Avengers Endgame, which I thought was a phenomenal movie. And spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. And again, kind of a big spoiler alert. But at the end of the movie, they have the scene where all the female characters come towards the end, and it's female characters that they barely developed in the entire series, right? And they had about 19 movies, 20 movies, whatever it was, to develop these female characters. And we're talking about Pepper Potts, who was only kind of seen as like the love interest. She was probably the most developed in Iron Man 1, and then literally nothing else after that. You had Mantis, who literally only reads emotion, has no action scenes in any capacity. And you have these kind of characters where I don't even care that they're female, but they're underdeveloped and they haven't had any actual fighting scenes. And now you have everyone come in at the end and try to be this fearsome women collective. And, you know, I thought it was sort of disrespectful. You had this entire scene where you have Hawkeye who's by himself, who's running by himself, who's showing that he's self-sufficient. You have Black Panther who's showing that he's self-sufficient, that he can run by himself. You have Spider-Man that's swinging around, showing that he can do it by himself. And then you finally give it to Captain Marvel, who's supposed to be your strongest character. And right when she gets it, you make it seem like she needs this huge group of female characters. And I thought that was just an obvious moment to pander, right? You weren't even showing how strong these characters were. You were just really focusing on a targeted audience and really pandering to that audience. And I thought that was even more disrespectful than just showing Brie Larson or Captain Marvel just kick ass. And I thought that that was an obvious example of where we weren't even looking at talent. We weren't even looking at that character's abilities. We were looking at an opportunity to really force diversity. And again, I'm not saying that we can't force diversity because I think that opens doors later on to look at ability. But when we keep pandering and when we keep doing things like this, where I don't even think it's really breaking down barriers, it's really just an opportunity to say, hey, we're including them. I guess you can't blame us now. And I think that that's just a shame because when we look at all the jobs that we have in this community, where we look at all the entertainment, when we look at all these things like this, I would be the first to argue that there's definitely a lack of high paid women in any profession, but I'd also argue that there are very much high paid people in different professions. It really just looks at what you're looking at. And I definitely argue that there is an opportunity to give people of color, women, people in the LGBTQ plus community, we can give these people opportunities to further break down barriers down the road. And that is okay. But when we're just talking about pandering, we're just talking about forcing diversity to force diversity, that's not breaking down barriers. That's just building resentment. And the reason I brought up the Women's World Cup in the beginning is because it's been popping up on my feed, my timeline on Twitter for the longest time, and it's interesting because a lot of the things that I see on it are, um, these women athletes should be paid the same as the male athletes, and the argument here isn't even about gender, and I think a lot of people find that that's the easiest route, and I guess it kind of is to make it easy to make this argument into a gender thing where it seems easy to make it seem like female athletes aren't getting paid the same as male athletes. Now, the problem here isn't about people getting paid different. The problems here are the different fields, the different markets, right? Where you have the NBA, you have the men's soccer, you have football, and these leagues have been around for a lot longer and they have arguably better marketing. That's why more people watch it. That's why there's more revenue generated, and that's why people are getting paid more. Um, then you have things like the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, where players and the league negotiate that, right? And that's why people in the NBA get these $221 million contracts for 4 or 5 years, rather than the $70,000 that women get paid, and in women in the WNBA get paid. Let me correct that. And that's because the revenue generated in the NBA, because of how long they've been here, because of how much marketing they put into it, because of all these sponsors that come into it, that's where the money's coming from. It's not because these male athletes are getting paid more just because they're males. There's a higher market for it. There's a more in-depth marketing strategy for these people. These athletes are treated like actual commodities and they're valued like that. And now when you look at the WNBA, I only see it when it's on the TV when I'm watching an NBA game. It's on Bleacher Report. It's on these places where now people are starting to market it. And that's amazing because once you start marketing it, once you start showing the talent that's in the WNBA, then you're able to start getting people to come into it. The WNBA is an interesting sport. There's actual amazing athletes there. But the problem with the revenue that they're generating is that they're doing a poor job of marketing their commodities. They're doing a poor job of marketing the talent that they have available. And once you start realizing that, once you start looking at women's soccer and look at men's soccer, and you look at how wide of a sport men's soccer is, right? Where it's just extremely popular in all these different countries, and that's why they generate $4 billion or whatever the number is. That's why they get paid so much, because the money that the revenue that they generate is so much higher, and the prizes are kind of based on the same percentages, but there's just a higher amount of money so that the percentage looks higher. But in reality, if women's soccer generated the same amount of revenue, let's say they made $4 billion too, rather than I think it was about $126 million in the last World Cup. If they made the $4 billion, they'd be getting the same amount of too. And now if you start marketing these athletes rather than focusing on the pay gap, and you start focusing on the talent, once you start focusing on how phenomenal these athletes are and what they're doing, and just showing the impact that they have on kids around the world, now you're going to start building genuine excitement. Now you're doing real change. You're not trying to force diversity down anyone's throats, but now you're focusing on getting the talent as wide as possible, getting the exposure as wide as possible, and really just getting it everywhere. And that's going to generate more money than these complaints on Twitter where companies can't do anything about it, right? There's no money to be giving these people. Sure, you can argue that at the end of the day they should be paying their athletes more, but at the end of the day it's a business, right? And you have to negotiate for the percentages that you're getting paid. You have to negotiate for all this. The CBA matters, and you have to take that in totality. You can't just say this is a problem of diversity, this is a problem between genders. No, this is a problem between marketing. This is a problem between accepting that talent is more valuable than anything else and being able to really hone in on that, being able to show the hard work that these women athletes put in and really just focusing on the talent there. Then you're getting the word out and you're going to get more money as a result. Right? And this all comes back to this idea where it's easy to point out that there's a lack of diversity, right? It's easy to go to um, it's easy to go to a red state and look at a high school and look at a red high school and see how many white males there are and look at how many white females there are compared to Latinos, compared to people in the African American community, looking at brown people and looking at all of that. It's easy to point that out, but it's harder to look at the root causes, right? What makes that state so red? What makes it hard for immigrants or people of color to come to that state? What makes it hard for people to access that school? And once we start asking ourselves these questions, rather than just jumping to the point that there's a lack of diversity, you need more diversity, show them how they can be more diverse. Show them that there's talent in these other areas where they can look into, and really be constructive with your criticism. And again, I think that's where I ultimately come down to, right? I, at the end of the day, will value merit over anything, right? I'll be the first to point out that if I don't care who the leader is, if it's male, female, someone in the LGBTQ plus community, if you are a strong leader, if you have the skill set and you're doing a phenomenal job, I don't care who you are, I'm gonna listen to you. Same goes with anything else, and I think that ultimately, as we come to the 2020 elections, as we come into the new school year, as we do all of these different things, I urge people to look into that and be able to understand that, sure, it's easy to point out that there's a problem, but be the one who finds out why there's a problem and try to suggest problems or try to suggest solutions that can actually alleviate those problems rather than being the other person that's just aimlessly posting stuff on Twitter to get clicks, to get retweets, because you're not helping anything. And at the end of the day, if you're not able to help anything, then what's the point of arguing about it? That's the end of this episode of the Java Talks. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys check all of our links in our bio. Peace out. Stay tuned for more.